As we celebrate America's independence, the ACLJ is fighting for you.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Seculo. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Jordan Seculo.
Hey, welcome to Seculo, folks. I hope you're enjoying the holiday, maybe traveling, maybe watching the broadcast. And I want to encourage you, too, about the ACLJ today on the broadcast. We've got a lot to talk about today, still on the show. What the ACLJ is working on, what some of our senior advisors are working on, international news that we're seeing out of Russia and Ukraine, of course, with Vladimir Putin. Domestically here, plenty of situations, too. And also ACLJ cases. Something we've been talking about a lot the last couple of months is making sure. And I know if you're a core supporter of the ACLJ, you know this, but we get new listeners all the time, and they're kind of learning. There's a Secular broadcast, who's the ACLJ, and some folks, honestly, in the last, now it's been 7, 8 years, see us from the Trump years, and I think sometimes maybe my case isn't big enough for the ACLJ. And we always remind folks, and we're going to be doing that in today's broadcast. You could be a student at a public school. And that's a case for the ACLJ. You could be a parent at a school board meeting. You could be, again, someone challenging a state law. It could be that you're challenging the federal government. It might be that big, but it could be, again, a city council ordinance, a city council meeting that involves prayer. So I always want to encourage people, if you feel, or your employer, a situation, Washington State Parks, and a volunteer there who was told you could no longer give tours because of the bumper sticker he had his personal vehicle. These are the kind of cases the ACLJ takes, and those folks went to aclj.org/help. And if you go to aclj.org/help, you just tell us your situation. You feel like your rights have been violated at work or by the government. And it could be, again, the most local government to the federal government. If you feel like your rights are violated, this is why I think it's important. When you go to aclj.org/help, I don't want people to ever be worried, well, this might not be the right case for the ACLJ. If it's not, we'll let you know. It's not going to be in a nasty way. It's just going to be, this is not a case we think we can help on. But if it's one that we do, an attorney's going to work with you right away. And attorneys review all of the incoming at aclj.org/help. So they're going to say, do they need more information? They'll give you, if they need to give you a call or write back a response to your email. And folks, because you speak up and stand up, oftentimes these cases, you're protecting the God-given rights of your entire community, maybe your state, maybe the nation. And it might all start at that school board meeting, at that public school class, where a student is forced to read just an outrageous monologue. All of this, again, just work the ACLJ has done in just the last few weeks and couple of months. So if you go to aclj.org/help, if you feel like your rights have been violated and don't feel like your case is too small for the ACLJ, there's no case too small. And because, again, a lot of folks don't speak out. They just kind of go by go with the current. And that's how we lose our rights. It takes people willing to speak up when they feel like their rights or there's been an injustice done to them. So I always encourage you to go to aclj.org/help. On today's broadcast, just to let you know, we're going to talk about Israel, work that we're doing specifically to fight back on the Biden administration when it comes to this boycott of working scientifically with some parts of the Jewish state of Israel. This is like, imagine all of the countries we work with in the world. A lot of bad actors that the U.S. works with and has very deep economic ties with. This is our number one ally in the Middle East and probably in the top 2-3 allies in the entire world. And yet we discriminate based off where one of their offices might be and say we won't scientifically work with you. So we're talking about that. Secretary Pompeo, who's a global senior advisor to the ACLJ on global affairs, is going to break down what's happening in Russia post this Wagner revolt and these mercenaries revolt. Where does Putin stand right now, and how does it affect the war in Ukraine that we're funding with our taxpayer dollars? We'll talk about those ACLJ issues I just went through as well. So I encourage you, it's the beginning of our matching challenge, the month of July, where you can double the impact of your donation. I encourage you to go to aclj.org and donate today. It's how we can represent that student, that parent, that volunteer at the park, all because of you. aclj.org, be part of our matching challenge. We'll be right back.
In my time in service, both as the CIA director and as Secretary of State, I watched the good work that the ACLJ was doing here in the States and all across the world.
The ACLJ's work at the UN, overseas with the European Court of Justice, is incredibly important.
We have on our team lawyers, non-lawyers as well, that are policy experts. They're all engaged in foreign policy issues.
We have been focused on protecting the nation state of Israel, particularly before the United Nations.
We don't shy away from the battles that are going on at the UN and just complain about them. We actually try to go in and do something positive and actually affect change.
The risk of an incomplete or unsolid relationship within the United States of America and Israel is real.
Israel is very important to the ACLJ, and we will always fight for Israel's rights.
We had a series of cases at the European Court of Human Rights, primarily dealing with religious liberty.
And as Secretary of State, I saw this too. Nations that had more religious freedom were on firmer footing. They had better democracies.
America has always been the world leader in religious liberties, in freedom of conscience and freedom of speech.
We've taken the First Amendment, and that has been our cornerstone. It's to defend the rights of people of faith and others that are having their rights abused.
We not only hold our government accountable, but we hold other governments accountable.
You have to keep the battle going when it's not cool anymore, when it's not the number one story on TV. You have to actually be committed to fighting it out, or else you'll never win.
The ACLJ's front and center on this. We're in a matching challenge campaign. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for. Your support of the ACLJ enables us to do all of this. Go to aclj.org today. That's aclj.org.
Secular, an issue now arising out of the Biden administration, more attacks on Israel that they kind of want you to not pay attention to because they try to say, well, this is not really about Israel. This is about other parts that we might disagree with Israel on. But again, when you see the rise in anti-Semitism, you even saw some of these protests over the weekend by Nazis outside synagogues. And again, some of this, the fact that that was in Atlanta, the number one group who suffers hate crimes, which is a much smaller percentage of people, is still the Jewish communities. We work to make sure they could have their Second Amendment rights at places of worship in New York because of that. And we've seen the attacks that have occurred on synagogues. But so when the administration does this, I think unfortunately it encourages a lot of those anti-Israel elements, both from the Ilhan Omars to the neo-Nazis.
Yeah, correct. So here's what you have. We've got an office, of course, in Jerusalem. Jeff Balaban heads that up. He's back in the United States for a few days in New York and is going to talk with us about this because under the Trump administration, scientific endeavors, which includes agricultural science, and there's a lot of things, were being shared with Israel as its full state, which includes Judea and Samaria, which is the biblical Israel as well. And under the Obama administration, they would not do anything with those, what they called territories, we call Judea and Samaria. The Biden administration has now put that back in place. Jeff, tell us what this means.
Thanks, Jay. I am back here, and part of it is meeting also in Washington because this is another dramatic step by the Biden administration it's actually an anti-Semitic attack on the state of Israel. I mean, it's purely anti-Semitic. It says that it's a boycott of scientific cooperation, not with people who live in Judea and Samaria, but only with Jews, right? That we will not. We are happy to work with researching in Wuhan with the Chinese. The Biden administration is defending that. But we will not. America will not work with Jews who live in Judea and Samaria. It's unconscionable. It's an attack not only on the sovereignty and legitimacy of the state of Israel as a Jewish state, it's an attack on all Jews everywhere by denying our ability to live and work where we please.
It's a punishment for operating in territory that is your territory. That would be like saying, Washington, D.C., we're taking you out and we're not going to allow you because, you're not a fully recognized state. I mean, this is absurd. But I think it's important for people to understand when we talk about Judea and Samaria, Jeff, what are we talking about?
We're talking about Judea and Samaria. Thanks for mentioning that, Jay. We're talking about Israel. We're talking about the biblical heartland. We're talking about the historical heartland. We're talking about the vast majority of Jerusalem, the capital of the Jewish people for thousands of years, the capital of the state of Israel since its founding. So we are talking about, and I spend a lot of time, as you know, on behalf of ACLJ in Judea and Samaria, in those communities. It's a hugely growing environment. People from all around the state of Israel are moving there. They're building new highways there. It's a wonderful area for expansion. And the Biden administration is doing everything in its power to destroy Jewish life there. Meanwhile, they're encouraging and in some ways funding up Arabs illegally to grab more and more territory to try to create their own state there on the Jewish homeland's core biblical heartland.
You know, I think what's important to point out here, too, and Jeff, you said it. I mean, I don't like making the comparison because Israel doesn't deserve that. They're a strong ally of the United States. Even when this happens, they're willing to stand with us and be on the front lines of the war on terror that continues to this day, even when we're not experiencing it as much, thankfully, and maybe domestically here, and the world's not, in Western Europe's not. They are on the front lines of that fight, and they still will work with us even amidst this. But the idea here, too, as you explained, if you thought about how many countries around the world that are committing just human rights abuses and atrocities, that the U.S. has decided for the interest of our country, it's better to work with them. And you would never see a statement like this, and they would look the other way. I mean, China's one example, but I mean, you could go through most of the world, and we don't really like the way those governments function. This is an actual real democracy with real elections and real rights for people who are Arabs and for people who are, again, of different backgrounds and different orientations. Free speech exists. Real freedom exists, and we punish these countries. And you know why, Jeff? It's to get the Europeans and those and I guess some Middle Eastern countries, though they've expressed little interest in this anymore. So it's mostly, I feel like it's Europe and the UN that the U.S. is trying to appease.
Right. And by the way, there's 100% right, Jordan. And it's no secret that there's a huge amount of activity in the state of Israel on cutting edge material, issues related to science that Americans benefit from every day of our lives. Guaranteed, every one of the people listening, watching today, in front of them, in the room with them, there's Israeli technologies that are making their lives better. The idea of undercutting America's interests and Americans' interests solely to pursue this agenda to say that the Jews don't belong in Judea, it's outrageous. There is not another identity on earth that America would treat, or the Biden administration or the Democrats would treat the way they're treating Jews.
No, and I think that they get away. There's an issue even arising, Jeff, at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum.
Unreal.
Where the Biden administration appoints board members through that. They also run the museum in Washington, D.C., which I would encourage everyone to visit. But they've appointed 2 board members who work with anti-Israel groups.
Well, actually, there are 2 that were reported, and I can also report to you a third because of research I've done in the past. They reported someone named Kimberly Emerson. It means Joe Biden appointed onto the Holocaust Museum Council a Kimberly Emerson who's associated with Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch is one of the most notoriously international anti-Semitic organizations on earth. They constantly talk about blood libel. They push blood libels, absolute lies about Israel is doing around the world, of course, under the banner of human rights. Similarly, the chairman, the National Board Chair of J Street, the anti-Israel group J Street, a famous group, who's also on the boards of the New Israel Fund and the Israel Policy Forum. By the way, the Israel Policy Forum, as far as I know, the only organization to actually testify against moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Joe Biden appointed them. In addition, he appointed someone named Michael Beals, who they call Biden's rabbi, who has used his pulpit, I found, to preach against Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem, to preach against the security walls, against the IDF, and basically accuse them of all kinds of atrocities and terror. So a consistent, progressive, anti-Israel message that falls over, as far as we're concerned, into anti-Semitism based on the accepted definition of anti-Semitism.
I mean, Jeff, here's the thing I think we have to point to, and this is important. We did some litigation with the Obama administration on this secret funding that was going on to fund, and we're looking at it again right now, where the United States was covertly funding organizations set up to try to topple the Netanyahu government the last time around. And then we found in the middle of this litigation, we find out that the United States sent $1 million to Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, the head of the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. They don't like calling themselves that anymore, but that's what they are. And This was his son got $1 million from the United States. So what we need to do on these appointments to the Holocaust Commission and boards for these museums is find out. We'll get some Freedom of Information Act requests out. I know we have some other ones that we're working on right now. We have to expose this for what it is. It's anti-Semitism at its core.
100%. And the people in Israel see it and feel it, and that's why I'm back and forth now so much, because there's grave concern. This is not just some normal diplomatic process. It seems to be an aggressive agenda, almost a vendetta against the fact that there were the Abraham Accords, and all of a sudden the Jewish state is being normalized and accepted in the region. And it's like this administration seems dedicated to destroying that, to keeping the Jews pariahs everywhere. And they're using implementing it in every place they can, including the Holocaust Memorial Council. It's outrageous.
I mean, that's why I mentioned, Jeff, I appreciate you joining us on the broadcast today, but this idea, too, that they try to do this to make nice with the UN, but it's mostly European countries that are left doing this. I mean, most of the Gulf states in the Muslim world, including some North African countries, are happy. And the last country that was actually negotiating a lot of it, and I still think is on the line, and if the right administration was in place that didn't demonize them, it would be Saudi Arabia next, which would be a whole change in how Israel would be able to operate, but the economic ties, even tourism ties, because the ability for Muslims to go visit their holy sites there in Israel, and Israel was willing to say, yes, we would love, we want your people to be able to come visit here. We want the economic relationship. And they said that they're no longer going to let the Palestinian issue be the stand in the way. But we know John Kerry, who's still in the administration, they all want it to stand in the way still. They won't let it go. Jeff's right on that. Even when the rest of the world is starting to let it go, the people who are actually there in the Middle East, they are still the State Department's position until that's handled. These countries shouldn't be doing working together.
Jeff, I want to go to you here. We only got 30 seconds left, but I think it's important to talk to our members. Now, we are strategically located. Our office in Jerusalem is in the heart of Jerusalem. I mean, you look over the historic walls of Jerusalem. We are right there in the middle of this. There's few groups that are operating as significantly in Washington, D.C., Strasbourg, France, where the European Court of Human Rights is, and Jerusalem. It doesn't exist, and we're about to expand into other areas as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely pivotal. I can tell you that we've become a point of contact for members of the Knesset, nonstop, for government ministers. We're trying to understand what this apparent vendetta is against Israel. And so it's absolutely necessary that we're there, and I'm so glad that we have the office there, and I'm happy that I'm running back and forth. Someone has to do it, and we're the only ones doing it.
I'm glad that you're doing it. All right, folks, support the work of the ACLJ. You do that by going to aclj.org. Got a domestic issue we're going to deal with now. Religious schools again under attack. It's pretty unbelievable. Back in a minute.
The Freedom of Information Act allows people to petition their government and ask for the background information as to why they came to a certain decision.
It's thousands of pages of paper, and in those thousands of pages of paper, you usually find a nugget.
We are entitled as citizens of the United States to know about how our government works.
Government agencies acting out of control.
They want to keep Americans in the dark. That's why it's incredibly important to have the ACLJ constantly pushing to find out what the background information is.
Do you remember the Iran deal? There was a video about what took place on that deal and it was edited. And the edit took out the key part of what was going on. State Department, White House, editing videos to keep it from the American public.
We have exposed that in our FOIA litigation, and we do that every day that we bring these cases.
We took it to the IRS. No one ever does that. And because of it, it's a very weak government agency that used to be the scary government agency.
What the IRS was doing was violating the Constitution and statutory law. Because of the litigation we engaged in, it's a different agency. They can't do what they were doing before.
We've got the declassified list of Obama administration officials who started asking to unmask. And they've been hiding behind in the shadows. These FOIAs bring them to light.
And all of this information came because we went to court to get the information.
The power of Washington, D.C. only works when the rest of us, the rest of Americans, are kept in the dark.
We may find one item of information in thousands of documents of irrelevancies, but we persist and we're on it every day of our lives.
The work that the ACLJ does matters. It matters to policymakers. It matters to ordinary citizens all across America.
Those of you that support the ACLJ, this is what it's all about at the end of the day.
Think we haven't been on this, folks? We've been on it. Back to Secular. Listen, keep getting your calls in on all this Hunter Biden news and the whistleblower, because I know it's complicated. You've got all these different district courts and different U.S. attorneys and prosecutors weighing in on this, lots of names. So if you got questions about it, get them in now, 1-800-684-3110. But I do want to turn to what's happening in Russia. I'm really excited to have a former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, joining us, because I wanted to get his insight into everything that happened over the weekend. Secretary Pompeo, we saw the Wagner Group march on Moscow, then abruptly abandoned their march on Moscow with a deal that allowed the head of the Wagner Group to go to Belarus. It was supposedly brokered by Lukashenko of Belarus, which had people kind of scratch their heads at how does he kind of have this much power to broker anything with Putin on his own. So looking at this with your background, what was going through your mind when this all started unfolding? It was very quick over the weekend.
Jordan, it's great to be with you again today. You know, when I first saw Prigozhin start to move, it reminded me of my time when I was in the administration, and Prigozhin's forces in Syria started to move against the Americans, and we killed some 300 of the Wagner soldiers that day. And we thought it was irrational, right? It was in Syria, he was crossing the river. He knew we had to know. And I remember thinking when Prigozhin's forces were on the move, you could watch it on TV, thinking he's made a mistake again, right? There's very unlikely that forces are going to gather, permitting him to take Vladimir Putin out, or for that matter, even to gain leverage to get rid of his nemesis, the Ministry of Defense leader Shoigu and Gerasimov. And so I remember thinking this is almost certainly to end badly for Prigozhin and his forces. And of course, within, 30 hours or so, they turned around. Prigozhin's now telling a story. I think there's still a lot we don't know, but I don't think there's any doubt that Prigozhin viewed himself as having crawled too far out on the limb, kind of in the same way some of the Chinese business leaders did. And Putin was attempting to rein him back in, and he saw this as his last-ditch effort to protect himself. And of course, it didn't end that way.
Mike, I always look at these things, and we done a lot of work in Russia. We had an office in Moscow on religious liberty issues throughout the entire country in the former Soviet bloc. I mean, our lawyers there litigated cases at the European courts on religious liberty and religious freedom and did a great job. Of course, we can't do that now with the sanctions in place. But I was going to ask you this question. I always look at the Russian situation, and you got to think it's like the Middle East. You got to think nine-dimensionally. It's like a nine-dimensional chess game. It's hard for me to believe that Putin didn't know a lot of this was happening, and that he may have been moving the players around here a bit. Could this be an exit or attempted exit ramp out of Ukraine? Because now he's got the Wagner troops allegedly not willing to fight, and he's got a domestic situation, and he says, you know what, I got to concentrate on home. I'm total speculation on my part.
Jay, your point about the fact that we should all be quite humble in believing we actually know what's going on inside the Russian leadership circles is precisely right. Jay, I think it's unlikely that Putin's viewing this as his exit. In some ways, that would be just a glorious outcome, right? A Ukrainian success story there would be a fantastic outcome without the use of nuclear weapons, without American soldiers. That'd be fantastic. I think more likely is that Putin actually believes that he now has to tighten down things inside his own country even more, but has to keep the failed mission in Ukraine alive, or there's too much confidence lost in him. So my guess is you'll see more tanks inside of Russia. You'll see bigger domestic security forces, and you will see a continued effort to mobilize even more Russians in the fight in Ukraine. This is a dangerous place for Putin to go, but his desire to stay in power has, as you know, Jay, that's always the rule number one. Keep the guy in charge. And I think you'll see him clamp down at home and continue to try and exert his capacity to at least tell the story of continued fighting in Ukraine. So I'm hopeful the Ukrainians will see the opportunity here and be able to make gains, further putting pressure on Vladimir Putin.
We know, for instance, the Wagner troops are in Haiti. We know they're on the continent of Africa. They've been deployed, as you said, in Syria. The lack of their ability to be deployed now in the Ukraine situation with Russia, in that conflict, what does that do for Putin, or do to Putin?
It's hard to know. We hear conflicting stories about where these soldiers, I've heard different numbers. It sounds like somewhere in the range of 25,000 or 30,000, where they're going to go. And remember this too, though, Jay, that the logistics and the money were all coming from the Kremlin. So Putin always had an enormous amount of leverage on Prigozhin, the leader of Wagner. Prigozhin had some leverage too, and he tried to exert it. But in the end, money matters, logistics matter. Prigozhin was clearly being pushed in ways that he didn't want to be pushed, and now he's been exiled. We'll have to see where the troops all land, but make no mistake about it, there will still be private Russian forces, whether they go under the name Wagner Force. Putin will still see that as a global instrument of power, and he'll find someone who he trusts for a period of time to go lead those forces wherever he needs them to keep Russian influence strong around the world.
I want to go to your new piece up at ACLJ.org, and we'll keep following, of course, what's happening in Russia and Ukraine very closely with this as it all continues to unfold day by day and minute by minute. But you have a new piece up at ACLJ.org that Biden's sanction relief for the Iranian regime will fuel murder, mayhem, and terror. This might actually surprise people, but we now know that the U.S. and Iran have re-entered indirect talks to try and come up with another or get back into the nuclear deal, of course, getting close to election time as well.
It's incomprehensible to me that this is just the zombie thing that won't go away. You know, there may be some politics in this. This could be the Biden administration looking for a win, a story to tell the American people about a foreign success. I think that dog won't hunt, but it may be they believe it. I think more likely they've always had this ideological view, this almost religious fanaticism that says we need to cut a deal with the Iranians to keep peace in the Middle East. We proved, Jordan, that wasn't true. When the Abraham Accords came into being, we proved that supporting our Sunni friends, the Gulf state friends, our Shia friends around the world who wanted peace and not terror like the Ayatollah does. And, you know, all of this taking place against the backdrop of Iranian weapons being sold, traded to the Russians to kill Ukrainian kids while we're in that fight too. It makes no sense as a matter of logic to me, but it is very clear the Biden administration remains intent on some kind of deal which will enrich the Ayatollah and create enormous risk for the United States and for our ally and friend Israel as well.
More about that in the weeks ahead, and look forward to your continued comments, and appreciate your work with us and your work around the globe. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we encourage people to go see that new piece up from Secretary Pompeo at ACLJ.org. It's exclusive to ACLJ, and that's part of the pieces that Secretary Pompeo does as Senior Counsel for Global Affairs. The ACLJ is these exclusive pieces for our site. And again, it's Biden's sanction relief for the Iranian regime will fuel murder, mayhem, and terror. It's honestly not getting as much attention as it should, that we're back in these indirect talks with, and again, it's an administration that seems like on every foreign policy decision, it's been a failure after failure after failure, starting with the withdrawal in Afghanistan.
Secretary Gates said Joe Biden was on the wrong side of every foreign policy decision. Let me say this, though, as we go into the second half hour of the broadcast. Your support of the ACLJ is critical, and this was a great example of it today, because on all these issues that we've discussed that are in the news, that you're getting commentary from the lawyers that handled the similar situation or handled the situation, we also have our government oversight project with our Freedom of Information Act litigation. We get the answers to these questions. We hold people accountable. Then you just heard from Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, Director of the CIA, to give you real firsthand impressions of what's going on. This happens because you support the work of the ACLJ and so many other issues that we don't have time to talk about every day in this 1 hour, including this broadcast being presented to you 5 days a week. So I encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ. You go to ACLJ.org. That's ACLJ.org, and make your online contribution there. It's a great way to stay engaged and in tune. We appreciate that. Stay tuned. We got a great half hour coming up. A lot more information. If you're watching on our social media, share it with your friends. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
My name is Jeff Balaban, and I am the Senior Counsel for International and Government Affairs here at ACLJ. You know, I came to work with ACLJ many years ago on a whole host of issues, on religious liberties issues generally here in the United States, on freedoms around the world, but also very much because Jews are a very small population in this country. I don't think people realize that Jews are only 2% of the population in 10 states. There are 30 states in which Jews are 1% or less of the population. And so Jews who are increasingly, as we see, embattled, and anti-Semitism has gotten worse and worse in the last few years, we rely for protection on the goodwill of Americans who care, who actually care about that. And ACLJ has been at the forefront, not just of religious liberties for all Americans, but religious liberties specifically for those the most embattled.
We need your financial support at the ACLJ to continue this work. Donate today at aclj.org. That's aclj.org.
Keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Seculo. And now your host, Jay Seculo.
Now more than ever is right for the ACLJ, and you're keeping us in the fight, which is one of our themes for this year. And we, as you just saw in the beginning of this broadcast, we are fighting for justice with the Durham investigation, which Lord knows we know more about than just about anybody in the country because we did that litigation for the former president. Of course, then we talked about India, where the ACLJ front and center on that. We talked about Nigeria front and center on that. We're going to talk about some other victories, but we said we would take some phone calls, and our phone lines are open at 1-800-684-3110. That's 800-684-3110. Logan and Cece are here with me. Let's go ahead and take another call.
Yeah, let's go to Tim, who's calling in North Carolina. You're on line 6, and you're on the air.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, guys. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
Just want to know, what do you do when, in my opinion, the communists or globalists, whatever you want to call them, have captured the highest agencies in your government and taken control? How do they get prosecuted?
Well, here's what you do. It's what we did. And it's Tim, it's not an easy process, but we took on one of the biggest agencies in the federal government, and that's called the IRS. And it was years of litigation. And we broke the back of the IRS and their targeting of conservative and pro-life groups and Christian organizations. And then we won, and we got a restraining and basically an injunction against them. We got monetary damages against the IRS. They had to change their policies. But here's what happened. As soon as the Biden administration came in, they did it again. They sent out a letter to a Christian group and said, D is for Republican, R is for Democrat. They used this legend. Bible was word of God. I mean, it was absurd that an agent would have written this. So what did we do? We filed a Freedom of Information Act litigation with the IRS to find out who authorized this because they were violating an order that had been issued by a U.S. district court that the IRS consented to. So you hold them accountable by taking them back to court. It's not an easy process, but you have to do it.
Yeah, and we can't do it without the support of everyone who's listening as well. I mean, we take these cases, we fight the fight, but we need assistance in that. And so we have great supporters, and I just encourage everybody, if you can, to send in support. But again, we're engaged, and it doesn't matter what the issue. We're going to fight for rights of Christians, of conservatives, and just
people
for liberty.
Think they're being abused. I mean, this idea that you can get discouraged. I get that, but we've had really good success in court. I mean, I'm thinking about the case we've got right now, where we've got 2 pro-lifers that were just beat on the streets, and we got the Baltimore Police Department to send out an all-points bulletin to find out who did it. We've got video of it. They're going to have to prosecute him when they find the guy criminally. We're going to go after him civilly. We're not going to let this stuff just sit. Student was harassed for having a cross in school. We ended up with the teacher apologizing on that. We got another school district that we're dealing with in federal court in Nevada where they had a 15-year-old girl demanded that the teacher she recited this pornographic, obscene play that some student had written as part of an assignment. When the mother went to read it to the school board, they shut her down. I'm going to play that video when we're back. And I'm just telling you, this is the nature of what it is. But that's why we fight. You want to try to grab another call?
We only got a minute and a half. I don't know if we guess quickly. Tony, you're on the air.
Tony, go ahead.
Yeah.
Logan thinks I can do it.
Yeah. What I don't understand is how the FBI can be the way they are. I fought in the Navy, and I'm 60 years old now, and why can't they hold the people accountable that are making these mistakes?
Well, they can, except the people that were going to hold them accountable were the ones also making the mistake. So now you got the Durham report, which we've talked about in the first segment of this broadcast, which sets forth the fact that this is institutionally corrupt. So you got to rebuild this agency. So in the next election cycle, whoever the president is has to get in there and literally clean house at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Clean house on the leadership. And start, as Durham said, holding people accountable for what they did. And we're going to do that here at the ACLJ. I mean, we're looking at this situation with an IRS agent giving false pretenses to get into someone's house. And these are outrageous. To hold them accountable, we take them to court. That's what we do at the ACLJ from coast to coast and around the world. As Cece mentioned, support the work of the ACLJ by going to aclj.org and also follow us on all of our social media. Great way to stay engaged with us.
That's right. It's really easy to do that. Just look for Seculo on any account that you have. We're on all the biggest social media platforms. And, of course, we really promote our friends at Rumble, so make sure you are liking and subscribing there. I do encourage you also, if you're watching on YouTube right now, a lot of new people watching on YouTube each and every day. So subscribe, obviously, on Rumble, but subscribe on YouTube. We are about to cross that 300,000 mark, and we'd love for you to be a part of that. So click subscribe if you can. Be right back.
When we see something, when we hear something, when we're concerned about an issue, we don't just talk about it. We do something about it. And that goes to our Government Accountability Project.
If we allow leaders in Washington, D.C. to make decisions behind closed doors, unaccountable to the people, then we are going to get skewed and corrupt decisions.
There are lots of other places that do lots of important work for America, but the ACLJ has taken up a lane which is irreplaceable.
The Freedom of Information Act, that's a statute that allows us to get information from the government. Starts with a letter from our offices in Washington to these agencies, and it says, give us this information on these topics. And generally, they don't. And then we go to court.
We go through a series of lengthy negotiations back and forth about what they'll give or what they won't give. We may get tons of information that's redacted, and we have to then go back and say, you redacted too much. We can't really find out what you're giving us because it makes no sense. So it goes through a process of litigation.
That is how you get information, and that office is going to be more active now more than ever.
The ACLJ has been extremely active in vigorously seeking to hold these bureaucrats accountable. We have filed hundreds of FOIA requests. We have received over 20,000 pages of documents in our litigation.
Holding them accountable, holding the Biden administration accountable so that all Americans are able to have faith in their government.
We will up our efforts. We will not stop.
You're finding a nugget in a gold mine. Occasionally you'll come up with something that is really a bombshell, but you have to persist in doing it, and that's what we do.
That's a little bit of what we do through our Office of Government Accountability, and of course that comes under our Office of Government Affairs. So your support of the ACLJ supports all of that.
Back to Secular. We are going to take more calls at 1-800-684-3110. So if you
How
have
about any topic?
I don't know, any topic.
It's
within scope. Can we say that?
Wacky Wednesday.
Yeah, 1-800-684-3110. Yeah, call in with whatever you have. I'm not guaranteeing you make it on the air, but you can give us a call. But there's a lot more we wanted to go over, especially work with the ACLJ. And we've always said, and we want to make sure we reiterate it, especially since there's so many new people joining us each and every day, is if you do need legal help, specifically in the scope of the work that we do, go to aclj.org/help. And if you have a question, whether that is within the scope, there's a simple questionnaire that gets you started. And look, that's how we tell everyone to reach out. Some people go, is this just a form, this, whatever. If someone comes to me personally and they go, how do I get legal help? Because trust me, friends do it all the time. I say, go to aclj.org/help, and you're immediately put in touch with an attorney.
Someone's looking at your file to see if it's a case we can take,
a human
or something
being
we can
is going through it. As long as there's going to be a basic questionnaire, and as long as it's part of that, someone is going to see it.
Yeah. All right, so
a lawyer.
We will take your calls, and as Logan said, aclj.org/help. Numbers of inquiries coming in have increased significantly, but also encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ, especially when you hear about what we're working on right now. So aclj.org, and if you want to talk to us on air, 800-684-3110. I want to go first to a case that got a lot of attention early on, and Logan said it's made some attention kind of virally in Twitter and some of the other places. That involved a student and a cross. You wouldn't think that would be the kind of case that would get this kind of attention. Yeah, some positive, some negative, I'm sure.
Well, some of it's bots. Some of it is the way that the left takes a hold of some of these topics. And we saw it with this one. And we saw it with also that speech that was had, the monologue that was reread, which is people don't click through and they go, oh, well, this is the ACLJ. This is some conservatives making stuff up. This didn't happen.
Yeah, well, it did.
Show us the proof. Show us the kid's name. Well, we're not going to do certain things like that.
I'm not going to show him the kid's name because he's a kid.
Right.
But I'm going to tell you this. We had a school district, and that school teacher said, and it was in Tennessee, told the kid that cannot possibly be your cross because A, you couldn't afford that cross. So basically you stole it. And B, you were twirling it around and hitting other students with your cross. The kid said, well, actually, I didn't do that. And I got the cross as a gift. And this was done in front of other students in a public school. They don't have enough problems in public schools. They got to pick on the kid with the cross. So, of course, there's video of what's going on in the public school because they have videos and cameras. So, ultimately, our lawyers, I think it was Abby Sutherland, worked on this one and said, yeah, we'd like to see that video. Oh, that video is going to be conclusive. You're not going to want to see it. Nah, we kind of would like to see the video. So we see the video, and of course the kid goes into his classroom, and guess where the cross is? Around his neck. And what did the teacher do? Embarrass the kid for the cross. And you want to know the rest of the story? The cross was given to him by an individual, I believe was on the school board, who does an after-school program or assists in an after-school program for kids. And he gave all the kids in this Bible club group, which we argued that they could have since 1991, gave them all a cross. But could you imagine, would a teacher come up to a Jewish student and say, you know that yarmulke you're wearing? Or to a Muslim student and make a statement about their religious garb or religious item they have? No! You can't do that to the Christian kid either. By the way, the case has been resolved. But it was resolved because a parent contacted us at aclj.org, and we took direct action.
Right. We do. And that's what we do. We take action and we get results. And in this case, we actually got an apology, not only to the mother and to the student, from the vice principal, the community superintendent, and the teacher. All three of them apologized to the student and to the mother, and that was a huge victory.
Which was all the mother and the parents wanted, was an apology. They didn't want to go and make it a federal lawsuit, which we would have done. They wanted an apology so that their kid is not embarrassed about his faith, and you know what? We got it resolved. That was a good one. Now, I got to set this other one up in Nevada. You've heard a little bit about it. It's getting pretty intense. This is in court. This is in federal court. A teacher in a 15-year-old class decides, 15-year-old's class, so what is that, probably a sophomore? Maybe not even.
Freshman.
Yeah, freshman
sophomore.
In high school. They come up with these stories, and kids are writing them, supposedly. They're anonymous. The one that goes to our client's daughter is obscene, and she doesn't want to read it. And the teacher berates her for this. She's berated in the classroom. The mother goes to the school board meeting, which you're allowed to do. You're the parent, even though they try to label you a domestic terrorist. Goes to the school board meeting. What does she do? She wants to read the actual thing her daughter was supposed to read. This is from the school board meeting. Take a listen.
This will be horrifying for me to read to you, but that will give you perspective on how she must have felt when her teacher required her to memorize this and to act it out in front of her entire class. I don't love you. It's not you. It's just, I don't like your dick, or any dick in that case. I cheated, Joe.
I'm sorry.
This is propaganda.
Excuse me. I don't, thank you so much for your comment. Forgive me. We're not using profanity. Simply, this is a public meeting. I asked for decorum.
If you don't want me to read it to you, what was that like for my 15-year-old daughter to have to memorize pornographic material?
Clark County Schools, Nevada, Las Vegas. The child is told to read it and is ridiculed for not reading it. The mother goes to the school board to read it, and they said, I'm sorry, you can't use profanity in a public meeting. But you can in a public school for a 15-year-old? So you're darn right we've gone to federal court in that. But it's outrageous. Now, Las Vegas has got a lot of issues. And you've got good friends in Las Vegas that have great ministries out there.
Absolutely.
But this is outrageous what took place there.
Yeah, and if anyone wants the proof, there it is. I mean, that's the problem.
I mean, if they want to go, knocking us on social media, we put it out there. It's Clark County Public Schools.
That one, it's
the mother is speaking. They cut her off because they don't want her using profanity, which all she was going to do was repeat what her daughter was told to repeat.
But it also gives people a bit more of the scope of all the work we do. So you heard what we're doing internationally. Now you hear what we're doing very domestically.
Yeah.
From your school board to the United Nations in India and all these different places. So the scope is incredibly large of the work that we're doing.
Yeah, and it's and we the
same. But don't
effort.
think it's too large to help.
No, I tell this to people. I mean, the same lawyers that represented a president will represent you. I mean, think about that for a moment. And that's whether, by the way, your case is at the Supreme Court, at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, or if it's at the
asking for an apology from your school,
asking for an apology from a school district in Tennessee, or demanding justice in Nevada, in Las Vegas. The ACLJ handles those cases because they impact people, and especially young people.
Absolutely, and I think this is where, like you said earlier, if you have cases like this, if you have issues like this, if you go to our website, aclj.org/help, you can get help from us for these type of cases. And no case is too small, no case is too big. If it fits within our scope, you will get a response, and we will assist as we can. And we usually are very successful in these. A lot of times all it takes is engagement.
Yes.
And then you do get the apology. Because if you don't engage, you won't ever get anything.
All right, we got another one. We're in Circuit Court of the City of Richmond, representing an individual there against the Virginia Real Estate Board. This one you can't even believe happened. What happened here?
So this is a case where a real estate agent who happens to be a Christian had on her website John 3:16 and would send in her emails, like she would sign her emails with Jesus loves you and her name. And what does the Virginia Real Estate Board do? They come after her. They target her, that she's discriminating, because what they're implying is the fact that she's saying she's a Christian, then she's saying she will only assist and help Christians, which is just ridiculous. You can't make that inference from the fact that she's putting John 3:16 on her website or saying Jesus loves you, that she's saying I'm only going to help Christians.
It's
but
absurd.
That's what the real estate board has determined, and they have gone after her. And this has been an ongoing case that we have been fighting. And now we're at the point of summary judgment where we're literally asking the court that you need to rule that Jesus loves you is not discriminatory language. And in fact, what they're doing is they're discriminating against her
100%.
as a Christian.
Yes, but here's what's the case. This is the absurd presumption. The absurd presumption is that when she uses an expression of her faith, like the citation to John 3:16, that's proof that she would discriminate against people who don't share her faith, which is ridiculous because she's putting John 3:16 on there to share her faith. But she's not saying, oh, if you're not a Christian, I'm not going to do business with you. That would be a very different situation. None of them is even alleging that. They're just saying that the Bible verse itself is evidence of this problem. I mean, that's how, when you think about that for a moment, Logan, the idea that you put a Bible verse out there and now it's a violation of the law, to me, that is that's why you got to have an ACLJ, and that's why you got to have an ACLJ in every state to go to these cases.
Yep, and you can support the work right now by just going to aclj.org. You can make your donation right now, aclj.org. It's very easy. Not only can you make a donation, support the work, but you also can see incredible content, not just this daily show. I want to make sure you know there's so much more that's available, and it's updated regularly throughout the day. So make sure you always are checking out what's going on at aclj.org and following us on our social media accounts. We get back, I want to take a lot of your calls, 1-800-684-3110. Going to move a little bit into talking more ACLJ work and also stuff that's going on at the border. But I'd love to hear from you on all these topics, 1-800-684-3110, 1-800-684-3110. And also I encourage you, if you're watching right now on Rumble or on YouTube, to either follow or subscribe. So follow on Rumble's the word there, but look for subscribe on YouTube. Getting close to that 300,000 and crossed 200,000 on Rumble. We'll be right back.
Thanks to your support of the ACLJ, we have had many victories.
The report is coming out. It shows that not only did Tea Party groups get more scrutiny, but so did a host of other conservative groups.
It was something that no one could believe our government was even capable of doing, and now they were admitting it.
It's one of the most significant wins in the ACLJ's history. To take on the IRS and win, for the ACLJ, life has always been a top issue.
Barbara, I am here at this site because there are thousands of people and millions across America that say abortion's murder.
When you're fighting for the life of the unborn, you're on the right side of history, you're on the right side of law.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this, are fighting for life to beat back the abortion juggernaut.
It's very important that we remain hopeful that the courts that the Trump administration was able to impact will give us good rulings that are based in law and sound reasoning.
This is one of the social issues we're winning.
There are historians that point out that religious persecution is at its highest level since the first 3 centuries when the Roman Empire led religious persecution.
A mid-state pastor's family is fighting to bring him home.
We are getting my husband after 7.5 months.
Turkey should not get away with holding my father one more day.
When Brunson was finally released, who meets him at the airport at 2:30 in the morning? Rick Brunell.
I saw Pastor Brunson walk down the stairs of the plane. I was filled with emotion. I told him that we were praying for him. The American people never forgot about him.
I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
We need your help as we continue this work here in the United States and around the world. Join the matching challenge today, and your tax-deductible donation will be doubled.
Welcome back to the broadcast, everyone. We're talking about life today because tomorrow, Saturday, is the one-year anniversary of the Dobbs decision overturning Roe versus Wade. And as I said at the beginning of the broadcast, our Bray decision at the Supreme Court served as a basis for that. And the Supreme Court in Bray said that opposition to abortion was not discrimination against women. Let's go ahead and take a phone call. We're also going to talk about some other cases that we have pending right now. We're taking calls at 800-684-3110.
That's right. Let's go ahead to Deborah, who's calling on line 1. You're on the air.
Hey, Deborah.
Hi. Yes, my question is, and I agree with you that abortion does not discriminate against, or forbidding abortion does not discriminate against women. I agree with you. I have my own arguments. I was interested in your arguments why forbidding abortion does not discriminate against women.
Let me tell you what I told the Supreme Court in 1991 and 92. This is exactly the question that I was asked by the Chief Justice. I remember the question being asked. And what I said was this. It's not an activity that is aimed at abortion at women. It's the activity of abortion that men and women of good conscience were opposing. So it wasn't because they were women. It was because they were it's the taking of a human life. And the court in a 6-3 decision agreed with us on that. And same again in the Dobbs case. So again, it was the act of abortion itself. And there were women that were opposed to abortion that, of course, are not discriminating against themselves. So the left was trying to make this equal protection clause argument that this is unequal treatment. And the reality is it was the activity of abortion, not the fact that they were women. True that only women can be pregnant, but it was the activity that was going to be engaged in by the abortionist that was the opposition, and the court agreed with that.
That's right. Absolutely. It's the taking of an innocent life. And again, that's where abortion distortion happens. They always want to spin the argument, and they always want to say, oh, this is about us protecting women, which we know Planned Parenthood does not care a thing about, because even when you try to put, common sense laws in place that abortion clinics need to have, abortions need to be done by a doctor. Abortion clinics need to have sterile environment. Planned Parenthood fights those things. That's not because they want to protect women. They're not about protecting women. They're about the money-making, profiteering off of killing babies, abortion. That's what they care about.
Yeah, and let me take you from the Supreme Court and get you right down to the city courts in Baltimore, because Robert from Maryland called earlier. We've got a case where two pro-lifers, Mark and Dick, been out in front of abortion clinics for decades. They simply share literature, talk to women that are seeking an abortion, and offer alternatives for life. They're not blocking access. They're not charged with blocking access. They were brutally attacked. I mean, brutally attacked. I'm going to play for you the video that the police department in Metro Baltimore has put out about our clients. Now, it's graphic. I'll describe it as we play it for people to see. So let's go ahead and roll it.
Baltimore Police Department's Central District detectives need your help identifying a suspect involved in an assault that occurred on May 26, 2023, around 10:20 in the morning in the 300 block of North Howard Street. Surveillance video shows the suspect, a white male with a beard, approaching a group outside the Planned Parenthood building. After a heated conversation, the suspect tackles one of the victims into the ground. Another victim, who came to help, is then assaulted by the suspect. Anyone with information about the incident or the suspect is asked to call Central District Detectives at 410-396-2411. To remain anonymous, call Metro Crime Stoppers of Maryland at 1-866-7-LOCK-UP. You can also submit a text tip by visiting the MCS Maryland website.
By the way, if you're in the Metro D.C. area or Baltimore and you recognize who this individual is, call that number, because he's still at large. Now, Mark and Dick were brutally attacked. These are guys in their 70s. Brutally attacked, kicked, dangerous. The police are looking for the individual. Once that individual is caught, they're going to face criminal prosecution. They're going to face a very aggressive American Center for Law and Justice civil lawsuit, because we're going to fight against this, because this is, again, another way to intimidate and silence pro-life speech, and we're not tolerated. Logan, let's take another call.
All right, Mary Ellen in Illinois, line 5, you're up.
Oh, hello. Robert triggered a thought in my mind with a lot of talk about President going forward being pro-life. And with Roe v. Wade, back to the states. It's like, what's the chances of a president signing bills coming out of Congress versus governors who are responsible, over their state? So should pro-lifers not be more focused and educated on what's going on in their state? I mean, rather than Congress.
It's not mutually exclusive, but we do think, and you're right, that understanding what's going on in your state is critical, because what Roe did was return it to the states. And that's why we've got a map up of all 50 states so you can find out exactly what is going on in your state. Maryland, for instance, which is a very pro-abortion state, the fight there is to make sure pro-lifers can speak out. So that's what we're fighting there.
Yeah, absolutely. You're correct that when Roe was overturned and there was found in Dobbs that there's no constitutional right to abortion, then this issue did return to the states. So I encourage everyone who's listening, you have to be involved and engaged at what's going on in your state. And even in states, we have states that literally abortions have been banned. I would encourage pro-lifers in those states not to give up the fight, because the fight's still going on. Maybe perhaps not in your state, but it is one that needs to be engaged in.
Cece said something during the break that I think is worthy of repeating here, and that is this attitude. There are states like Tennessee, Alabama, I could go through a list of them, probably 20 states, where abortion's not really an issue anymore on a statewide basis. But it is an issue for the rest of the country. And what we're trying to seek here is to protect the life of the unborn, no matter what state they live in.
That's right. It's still a United States issue. And even if it's not an issue in your state because Dobbs came down and then your state is very conservative and they are protecting life and not allowing abortion, you still need to be aware that this fight and battle is going on in other states, and try and be engaged and active as you were previous to Dobbs.
We're going to be on for another half hour. In the next segment of the broadcast, I'm going to get into 2 cases we have for life for students where their message was being stifled by the federal government. And we're going to talk about where those cases are. But I go back to the nature of this fight. This is something we've been engaged in for almost 40 years. We're not backing down. We've seen victories. We're at the Supreme Court again on it. It's not on overturning Roe because that's been overturned. It's now utilizing these states, utilizing these groups like Planned Parenthood, utilizing in this case the RICO statute to silence pro-lifers. By the way, this isn't the first, second, third time I've had to deal with RICO and pro-lifers at the Supreme Court. This is number 4. 4th time. And we've won it, but we're back up there again. And so this utilization of RICO is something that they've wanted to do the entire time.
I don't think we have time to get to this call yet, but stay on hold, and if you're on the air,
we'll take on hold.
And if you want to give us a call, 1-800-684-3110. We do have a second half hour, as you said, coming up. Some of your local radio stations don't carry it, and if they don't, they should, but you can find us broadcasting live right now or archived on ACLJ.org, on your favorite podcast apps, or on Rumble or YouTube. So you can find us on all those platforms, all those social media outlets. So if you lose us here, just flip on over. We're broadcasting live.
Support the work of the ACLJ, especially on this life fight, folks. Become part of our team. Go to ACLJ.org. Any amount you donate is going to be tax deductible, and that allows us to stay in the fight. And we encourage you to do that. ACLJ.org to support the work of the ACLJ. On this issue, by the way, we're handling the life issue internationally, globally. Our affiliates all over the world are standing up for the life of the unborn. Doesn't matter what state you live in. Even if you have the most pro-life state in the country, there's still abortions going on and the taking of innocent human life.
We want you to double the impact of your donation. It's very clear. It's not one of these wild matching challenges you get where you see, it's a 6 times match. What does that exactly mean? Ours is very straightforward and simple at the ACLJ. We have a group of donors who have agreed for the month of July to match the donations that come through. So let me encourage you, make that donation today. Be part of the matching challenge at ACLJ.org.